just rape, or would it be a wider set of sexual, serious, violent offences? And is it just for the period between arrest and charge, or is it for a longer period? I know that my honourable friend and government are wanting to listen to the voices, wanting to hear the research. I hope that we as a House can do our duty properly and make sure we come up with the right conclusion. That will need a bit of time, but let's please not be overly partisan about it.
Glenda Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. To pick up on the point that the honourable gentleman made, hoping that this would be a non-partisan debate, and I have to say, in light of the speeches that we've listened to this afternoon, it seemed to me to be remarkably non-partisan in a party political sense. But also what is markedly lacking as far as the policy which his government is presenting is any lack of evidence that the change that is proposed is needed or would indeed bring about any kind of improvement if what I understood was the centre of his argument, an improvement in convictions for rape. He also hoped that this debate, given the amount of time that his government is affording to it, the decisions upon it would come about by a consensus in this House and in the country. How can there possibly be any consensus in the country if his government does not enter into the most widest, the deepest and the most detailed consultation? The question still remains why his government has selected rape the single crime of violence that should afford the alleged perpetrator anonymity. And answer has come, there none. In the excellent speech that my right honourable friend who led for us from the front bench has made, the implications of this are even wider if we go down the road. She touched upon the issue of affording anonymity to teachers, and here again his government has come up with absolutely no detail of what the offence, the alleged offence that a teacher may have entered into is. She gave the graphic example, which we all know of in the past, of children who had been abused, not only by teachers, but indeed by members of their own family, by other people in authority, and the automatic response of society at that time had been to absolutely disbelieve that child. And the abuse then went on a wider and wider circle. I'm referring to the past, but in contemporary reporting, we know that this still goes on. The scandal of what has been happening within the Catholic Church continues to reverberate. And the essential there was the idea that secrecy was all. And the imbalance of power between the abused and the abuser was reinforced. And that is my fear about this proposal and selecting rape as the only violent act which is afforded this kind of anonymity. Because what we are, I think, tending to forget in our debate, or rather the government is tending to forget in presenting this proposal, and indeed the Minister in his opening remarks made a statement, and forgive me, I will paraphrase because I can't remember it precisely, but essentially what he was saying was that it is now an accepted absolute that acts of violence against women are anathema, that everybody in this country, everybody in this House, everybody in the criminal justice system, everybody in the police service are automatically appalled at acts of violence against women, and because of that they are immediately on the front foot, exercising all their abilities, all their talents, all their resources to track down whomsoever committed this heinous act. And we all know that that is absolute fantasy. Absolute fantasy. We are witnessing at the moment one of the largest manhunts, I gather, this country has ever seen, to try and track down a man who, it is alleged, has murdered one individual, injured two others with guns, who boasted before he left prison of what he planned to do. I have no doubt prison officials were very busy, but I'm sure equally it went into that little pocket that's, well, it's getting bigger and bigger in my view, of something called a domestic within the criminal justice and police system. All it needed was for those officials in the prison to take these threats seriously, to have rung immediately the alleged perpetrator's local police station, so that they then would have had to have taken seriously those threats themselves, and perhaps the largest manhunt in British history would never need to have taken place. Because there is still, as I said in one of my interventions, I believe, a prevailing view in this country that incidents, for example, of rape, are the fault of the victim. You may groan and you may moan. If I may just finish this one point. There may be groans and moans from the other benches. But it isn't that long ago, when I can remember distinctly, I'm sure it could never happen now, but I still think people have that mental view of a judge summing up in a rape case, advising the victim of the rape that she should perhaps have worn a longer skirt. I give way to the Honourable Lady, was it?
The Honourable Lady, please help us in this way. We all agree there should be more argument based on evidence. Where is her evidence which she says means that people still have these views towards people who make complaint of rape? Where is the evidence?
What the Honourable Lady's last part of the remark was. I will give her direct evidence of a constituency case of mine where a woman who had been systematically abused by her partner, the law did act, an injunction was laid, the perpetrator of these offences was not allowed within a certain distance of their home, and what happened? His brothers took over. It is a fantasy to think that everybody in this country regards acts of violence against women as being totally outside the pale. And the reasons individuals given... May I just finish this point? And many of the reasons that are given have to do... Honour killings. Does the Honourable Lady seriously think that people who genuinely are opposed to acts of violence against women would enter into honour killings? I give way to the Honourable...
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way to me. Does she not accept that there's a huge danger in this debate and any consultation process that does take place, that this can become a battle of the sexes? It all becomes a gender issue, when clearly that is not the case. Defendant anonymity and the issues surrounding it is about trying to impose fairness for all in the criminal justice system.
All due respect to the Honourable Gentleman, we have heard, and obviously he's not the only one, member sitting on those benches is obsessed with evidence-based decisions. The evidence that has been presented in this chamber this afternoon is rape is exercised in almost exclusively upon women. There is a gender base here. Yes, it is.
40% of all rape complainants are either male or they are children. 40%, and of the 60% who are aged over the age of 16 are now female. We do not have the statistics as to how many of those are women making complaints as to what happened to them when they are children. It's unfortunate, perhaps, that we haven't got those statistics after 13 years in government.
Well, we've already established that as far as children are concerned, that is something that we all absolutely agree with. That is why the question has been asked, why has rape been afforded, the allegation of a rape perpetrator, why have they been afforded the privilege of anonymity, but someone, for example, who is downloading child pornography isn't? My whole argument here is it has not been explained to me why rape is the act that is being afforded this particular privilege. And my argument for why the government has presented this seems to me that if they go down this road, it is simply undermining, if you wish, making rape, making general acts of violence against women unacceptable in a much more deeper way than it is at the moment. Far too often we hear of cases where, for example, a woman has laid in front of the police the serious threats that she is undergoing on a daily basis from an ex-partner, and we then read that the police did absolutely nothing about it, and that woman, and in some terrible instance, well, you can't extend it to say it's more terrible when children are killed, but we do know of incidents where the woman and her children have been killed by that partner. I've already given the example of honour killing. we had a recent, highly publicised case of the most heinous crimes in which every report of it started out with not 3 women were murdered, but 3 prostitutes were murdered. And I go back to what I believe is still a central issue here, and where I am so opposed to what the government is proposing in this case, is that there is still this belief that attacks upon women are engendered by the woman herself. It's no good the Honourable Lady shaking her head. She knows and I know of incidents when people do not report an incident of rape because they were drunk at the time, and they know that they would be castigated for that. She equally knows that when women do go forward claiming that they have been raped, the initial response in quite a wide circle is that they are making it up, which is why it seems to me we have to be exceedingly careful if we go down this road of putting rape in that kind of special category, which other violent crimes are not granted. If there was an argument being put forward by the government that all violent sexual crimes should be afforded anonymity, if all violent crimes, in a sense, should be afforded anonymity, or to go back to the government's central argument, which is false accusation can damage an individual's life, their family's life, in some instances may be their actual profession, then I would be prepared to listen to those arguments if there was sufficiently wide consultation, not just in this House, but over the country at large, to consider that proposal. I entirely agree with the points that have been made, that if we do go down that road, we are actually undermining one of the basic concepts of our criminal justice system, in that accusation and argument in criminal cases should take place in public. And I would be extremely chary of moving away from that particular situation. But what the government is proposing, its lack of commitment to wide consultation in this area, causes me grave, grave concern. One of the salient points that my honourable friend who spoke from the front bench from this side of the House raised the issue of freedom of the press. And I do think that also is an issue that we have to take into deep consideration before we make any kinds of changes. But I revert back to a point that I made slightly earlier, and which reinforces my contention that still we are not sufficiently adamant, sufficiently active, there are insufficient resources put into tackling the broader issue of acts of violence against women. I gave the example of the recent incident where 3 women were brutally murdered, and every single news outlet began a report of that event with 3 prostitutes. I also think that Dr. Shipman perhaps would not have got away with his mass murder if his victims had been young women as opposed to middle-aged and elderly women, because there would undoubtedly have been, in my view, a desire on the part of the, well, desire perhaps is an extreme word, of the press presenting it as though these acts against women had some kind of sexual undertone. And there is still this, in my view, this prevailing attitude which may not be directly acknowledged, but does permeate so many aspects, certainly of the criminal justice system and of law enforcement, when it comes to acts of violence against women, for the immediate reaction, the first reaction, to say, we have to be careful about this. Oh, you know, the argument of malicious accusation. I've seen too many constituency cases and too many women and their children whose lives have been brutalised because insufficient people have taken what has been said to them sufficiently seriously, have ignored very often the evidence before their eyes. I thought in his maiden speech the honourable member for Gillingham made a very, very salient point when he raised the different approaches to these kinds of crimes in Europe, where there are special courts where there excuse me, properly supported and financed supports for victims in these cases. That is a lesson that we should be learning in this country at a far greater speed than we are. I absolutely admit we've made strides in this direction, but we need to make them bigger and more.
Aidan Burley.
I'm grateful